Madam Speaker, honourable members, I first would like, on behalf of all honourable members, to congratulate the Honourable René Batiste on her election as Speaker, and also His Excellency Mr. Walter Gums. These two officials are of the highest quality, and we are very honoured to be able to have such distinguished citizens of the OECS to occupy these positions. We thank you very much. Madam Speaker, I would also like, on behalf of all my colleagues, my honourable colleagues, to express our profound thanks to the government and people of Antigua and Barbuda for making available the Parliament building of Antigua and Barbuda as the host, as an ongoing basis, the base for this OECS Assembly. We are grateful, Mr. Prime Minister, to your government and to the people of Antigua and Barbuda. Madam Speaker, permit me to extend congratulations to all the Olympians from the Caribbean, including our star from Gonsalves in Grenada, Rani James. When the history of this period is written, it would be noted that a region of a mere 5 million persons stood up at the Olympics, at least moved with their feet and with their hands and their brains to perform such outstanding feats to rival even the greatest superpowers in this world. Madam Speaker, honourable members, this inaugural meeting of the OECS Assembly, the first concrete step regionally and collectively to engage the parliamentarians, government and opposition from the member states of the OECS in a profound consultative process in decision making, which hopefully would evolve into actual lawmaking and direct elections in the not too distant future. The dream of the titans from the immediate past, V.C. Byrd and George Walter, Robert Llewellyn Bradshaw and Paul Southwell, William Bramble and John Osborne, Edward LeBlanc and Rosie Douglas, George F. Charles and John Compton, T. Albert Marichaux and Morris Bishop, Robert Milton Cato and James F. Mitchell. The dream of all these titans of the past for a deeper union in our sub-region is now becoming a reality before our very eyes. On June the 18th, 1981, the Treaty of Bastille establishing the OECS was signed in the capital city of St. Kitts and Nevis. One member of this august assembly, the Honourable Esther Byrd, leader of the opposition in Antigua and Barbuda, was a signatory to the original treaty. The successor intergovernmental instrument, the revised Treaty of Bastille establishing the OECS Economic Union, which came into force in June 2010, was attested to by the distinguished Prime Minister of Antigua and Barbuda, the Honourable Baldwin Spencer, the leader of a political party which has been in electoral contestation for over 2 decades with that of the Honourable Leader of the Opposition. This fact signifies the absence of political partisanship in the crafting of and support for treaty arrangements designed to deepen functional economic and governance integration in our region. Across each of the member states of the OECS, the governing and opposition parties are at one on this issue, despite occasional dissonance on this or that detail. The 2010 revised Treaty of Bastia, inclusive of its Dispute Settlement Annex and the Economic Union Protocol, has revamped the original treaty in at least 7 major ways, namely, the strengthening of the framework for functional cooperation, the creation of a single financial and economic space, the securing of the freedom of movement of citizens of the protocol member states, that is to say the independent countries of the OECS and Montserrat. As we know, Anguilla and the British Virgin Islands are associate member states. The establishment of the areas of exclusive legislative competence and restrictive legislative competence, the according of additional decision-making powers to the OECS Authority, the Council of Ministers, and the Economic Affairs Council, the fortifying and extending of the general administrative oversight within the OECS through the creation of the OECS Commission, presided over by the OECS Director General, with representation at ambassadorial level from each member state, and the introduction of a legislative filter through the establishment of the OECS Assembly. All these innovations are directed at deepening and broadening OECS integration, improving responsible and more effective governance in the OECS, and delivering more benefits, much better, to the people of the OECS. Madam Speaker, each member state which has signed and ratified the revised treaty has solemnly agreed to take all steps to secure the enactment of legislation which are necessary to give effect to the provisions of this treaty and the decisions taken thereunder. Specific obligations are imposed on each member state within the framework of the general undertaking as to implementation. At the same time, the revised treaty declares in Article 5.4 thereof that, quote, nothing in this treaty requires a member state to undertake amendments to its constitution, and its obligations as to implementation are circumscribed accordingly, unquote. Madam Speaker, honorable members, this OECS Assembly derives its structure and authority from the revised treaty, which I have been advised has been put into statute law domestically by the respective parliaments of each member state. Each member state sends a number of its legislators to this assembly, a specified number, chosen by the legislative body of each member state, from government and opposition parliamentarians, proportionately to represent their constituents. The central role of the OECS Assembly, as set out in Article 10.1.3 of the revised treaty, is to consider and report upon A, to the OECS Authority on any proposal to enact an act of the OECS and on any other related matter referred to the Assembly by the Authority, and B, to the Council of Ministers in the case of any proposal to make certain regulations which have been referred to the Authority. The matters of relevance, Madam Speaker, which the OECS Assembly may be called upon for consideration and reportage, include specifically the 5 areas of legislative competence of the OECS authority, namely the common market, including the customs union, monetary policy, trade policy, maritime jurisdiction and maritime boundaries, and civil aviation. 3 areas of restrictive legislative competence, namely common commercial policy, environmental policy, and immigration policy, and other areas of sub-regional coordination necessary for a better achievement of the purposes of public policy. Madam Speaker, honorable members, in the latter regard, that is to say, functional cooperation and coordination in several other areas outside of those specified for legislative competence and restrictive legislative competence. We have a whole range of matters in the Economic Union Protocol are likely to be considered and reported upon, not necessarily for any legislative filtering immediately, but certainly for consideration and reportage. And these include trade issues and the free circulation of goods in the economic union, freedom of movement of citizens of the protocol member states within the economic union era, economic transformation, economic growth, employment and poverty reduction, policies for the various economic sectors and subsectors, fiscal policy, incomes policy, law and order and citizen security, health and education, social security, sports and culture, air and sea transportation, airports and seaports, CARICOM affairs, foreign policy, and international economic relations. As we'd see, honorable members, there is a wide area for us to hold discussions, formulate common policies, in addition to filtering legislatively the acts in the 5 areas specified for the competence of the OECS authority to enact legislation and the 3 other areas of restrictive competence. Madam Speaker, it is to be noted that in relation to 2 specific areas of legislative competence for the OECS authority, that is to say, monetary policy and civil aviation, the competencies are circumscribed as per Article 14.1 of the revised treaty. Thus, in the area of monetary policy, the competence is to be exercised by the OECS authority only on the recommendation of the Monetary Council of the Eastern Caribbean Currency Union. Similarly, in civil aviation, the competence in this category is to be exercised only on the recommendation of the Board of Directors of the Eastern Caribbean Civil Aviation Authority. Article 6 of the revised treaty lists the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank, the Eastern Caribbean Civil Aviation Authority, and the Eastern Caribbean Supreme Court as institutions of the OECS, but it is made absolutely clear that this listing, quote, does not impair any powers or jurisdiction of any of these institutions, unquote. Madam Speaker, honorable members, on the occasion of the formal opening of the 55th meeting of the OECS Authority on June the 10th, 2012, when I assumed the 1-year rotating chairmanship of the authority, I highlighted 5 broad areas of priority on which we ought to work assiduously over the next 10-12 months or so. I reiterate them here. First of all, we all must love and care for the OECS. This sounds simple. The cynical may consider it trite or woolly. Far from it. It is the most important goal or consideration. Each of us has an obligation to love and care for his family or her family, and to be considerate to those who depend on us. The OECS is part of our extended family. Indeed, politically, it is our family. If we speak in all the highfalutin tongues of men and women, or even of angels, but we have not love or caring, we are merely sounding brass and clanging cymbals. Our love and caring for the OECS must protect and preserve it, and contain our hopes and faith for the future. In everything we do or say politically, we must have the OECS at its center. We must approach its work with steadfastness and creativity. It must bind us ever more together. And our governments must make every effort to pay the dues required to the OECS and its organs to survive and thrive. Secondly, over the next year, we must continue the process of consolidating and extending our gains from the OECS and its institutions or mechanisms which deliver value to our people. We must remind ourselves of the value delivered to our people through the OECS. These gains flow especially from our coordinated and integrated work in the free movement of our people, money and banking, the judiciary, civil aviation, education and health, telecommunications, the environment, maritime matters, external trade and foreign policy, national security, poverty reduction, capacity building, and other vital areas of functional cooperation. All of these things which we have been doing, and we will continue to do and do more and do them better. They bring lasting value to the people of our sub-region and improve the quality of their lives. And that is why we are about this exercise. This is not a mere intellectual or academic pursuit. This is to deliver real benefits for real flesh and blood people who constitute the citizens of our OECS region. Thirdly, we must make the revised Treaty of Bastille establishing the economic union take root. This recent advance in our sub-regional governance deepens and improves the integration mechanisms. The new institutions such as the Consultative OECS Assembly, the Economic Affairs Council, and the OECS Commission must be placed on a solid footing. Vitally, all matters resident in the Annex and Economic Union Protocol are to be fully elaborated and put within appropriate juridical frameworks over the next year. This protocol is of great importance, for example, to the freedom of movement of persons and goods. A host of trade issues are to be fine-tuned. The work ahead is hefty. The agenda is heavy laden and the hands are few. Fourthly, we must finalize all necessary arrangements for the revised Treaty of Bastille to be accorded a special and differential place in the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas, which establishes CARICOM. Some within the wider CARICOM are resisting this reasonable proposal, so necessary and desirable for the continued optimal functioning of CARICOM. I feel sure, however, that wisdom will prevail in this regard. Fifthly, the OECS has to navigate itself properly in its own interests through and within a series of other cross-cutting regional mechanisms, including CARICOM, the Economic Partnership Agreement between CARIFORUM and the European Union, the proposed associate status of Martinique and Guadeloupe with the OECS, the ALBA, that is to say the Bolivarian alternative for our America, the Community of States of Latin America and the Caribbean, CELAC, and trading or developmental arrangements with other countries such as the United States of America and Canada. The configuration of regional integration is being altered before our very eyes. So the OECS and CARICOM too must accommodate themselves in their own interests to the altered and altering regional and global landscape of a more integrated political economy. We must accommodate ourselves, yes, to these realities, but we must also resist creatively and sensibly where such resistance is necessary and desirable. Madam Speaker, honorable members, do not for one moment think that we cannot suffer reversals in our sub-regional integration movement. To be sure, we have made immense progress since the original Treaty of Bastille was signed in 1981. Our revised Treaty of Bastille of 2010 has made a quantum leap in regional governance and the creation of a single economic space. But challenges abound. Ironically, the global economic crisis, which ought to cause us to bind ourselves ever more closely in a more perfect union, contains ingredients to divide and fragment us. Remember too that our very islandness sometimes engenders unseemly nationalist or even chauvinistic impulses. So let us ever be reminded that divisiveness and West Indian unity are riding partners. We got to face these realities and make sure that the unity side of the contradictions prevails over the divisive elements. You know, we do not have far to look to remind us that we can have setbacks. CARICOM has suffered some setbacks recently, though the last meeting in St. Lucia gave us occasion to feel hopeful. But we are currently on pause in CARICOM in its quest for a single economy. I want us to avoid all these kinds of reversals in the OECS. And that is why I urge that above all, we must love and care for the OECS. It is our anchor in the dangerous regional and global communities. I'm very pleased, Madam Speaker, honorable members, to see so many distinguished representatives of foreign governments here. They do take an interest in what we do. Not only the diplomatic representatives of our friendly allies, but we have in our midst too a delegation led by the President of the Regional Council of Martinique and Guadeloupe. And today, along with the Director General of the OECS, we had a very interesting, very fruitful discussion, mapping the parameters for negotiations between ourselves and Martinique and Guadeloupe in respect of their application for associate membership of the OECS, an application which received the support of the outgoing French administration and the current French administration. We are very grateful. Perhaps aptly, Madam Speaker, honorable members, I conclude with the incisive words of a Martinican and Caribbean intellectual and patriot, Edward Glissant, in his fascinating book, Caribbean Discourses, Selected Essays, first published in 1989. And this is what he had to say, quote, "The notion of Caribbeanness emerges from a reality that we will have to question but also corresponds to a dream that we must clarify and whose legitimacy must be demonstrated. This reality is there in essence, dense, inscribed in fact, but threatened, not inscribed in consciousness. The dream is vital, but not obvious. We cannot deny the reality. Cultures derived from plantations, insular civilization, social pyramids with an African or East Indian base and a European peak, languages of compromise, cultural phenomenon of creolization, pattern of encounter and synthesis, persistence of the African presence, cultivation of sugarcane, corn, and pepper, site where rhythms are combined, peoples formed by orality. There is potential in this reality. What is missing from the notion of Caribbeanness is the transition from the shared experience to conscious expression. The need to transcend the intellectual pretensions dominated by the learned elite and to be grounded in collective affirmation supported by the activism of the people, unquote. The OECS authority, the OECS as a whole, including this assembly, this OECS is making the dream of oneness become part of our lived reality. Not only a shared experience, but also a conscious expression. The people of our OECS region must now own their integration movement, must love it and care for it in their own interests. I'm obliged, Madam Speaker.